Hello, I am the Spider Fanboy, and this is going to be my first official proper content that I'm going to be creating here on YouTube. Uh, I made a video a while ago on my channel discussing how I wanted to start doing things like what ifs in relation to manga, cartoons. Sorry, I have my two pets in here. Um, but yeah, I want to take a swing at content creating. I always have these ideas bouncing around my head, so I figured why not go ahead and come out with them to the internet. So today I want to start with a Bleach What If. Series has recently come back. It was absolutely hype. I loved it, and I hope all of you did too. I'm hoping that this gets to the Bleach fans. Definitely don't want just some random person finding my video and then completely crapping on it. But yeah, first video, so let's see where this goes. I'm basing this what if around what if Ichigo developed his powers earlier? Specifically, what if he developed his full bring and Quincy powers earlier? So we're gonna start from the very beginning. The night his mother died. I believe he was around 9 years old. So that would put this around 6 years before canon, before Rukia shows up. So the way I wanted this to go about, essentially when his life is in danger, Ichigo's spiritual pressure has a way of acting up. This obviously is more intense after he actually gets his powers, but we're gonna go ahead and give a little leeway here. Perhaps his Ryatsu, Ryatsu, I believe, is spiritual pressure. It lashes out, catches Grand Fisher off guard, doesn't stop his mom from getting killed, sadly, but he is vivid. It acts up, and he's able to actually see Grand Fisher the Hollow. Because it was explained, I believe, that while he could always somewhat see ghosts, he can. Around the time Rukia showed up, they started to become more clear. Like when he was younger, it was similar to when Grand Fisher lured him. He'd see a mirage of a spirit there, and then it would fade out of view. So here, that's going to be a little different. From this point onwards, after the attack, um, he's much more spiritually aware. And to help with the Quincy side of things, I decided to throw in that they end up having a joint funeral because pretty sure everyone should know this by now. Uryu's own mother, if you're an anime only watcher, the maid that was shown during the recent flashbacks that covered the novel with how Ishin and Masaki met. The maid becomes Uryu's mother. She was an impure Quincy as well, and her power. She was also affected by um, Yuha Box, however you say his name, by his ability when he collected all that impure Quincy power into himself, which killed Masaki and robbed her of her abilities, and also killed Uryu's mother. So let's say Ryukin and Ishin, despite their differences that they may have, I think more on Ryukin's side. Ishida's dad, Uryu's dad, but whatever. They decide to come together, solidarity as now single fathers who were affected by the same event, leaving their wives powerless, and they were away, unable to do anything. So they come together, and Soken, uh, Uryu's granddad, and Uryu are there, and Soken decides, since he, as a way of helping Uryu, wants to train him in the ways of the Quincy. I don't know if he was training before this point. I don't know how young he was when he started, but why not just throw in this is when he decides to start as a first as a method of distraction and then just something he grows a true passion for. Um, so like we could say maybe Ichigo asks his dad who these people are, who the Ishidas are, and they get introduced, tells him that like, oh yeah, my God, I am spacing out. Uri's dad over here. Um, his family took in your mother when she was younger, helped raise her, and he even helped me get my medical degree and open up my clinic. He's a pretty big doctor. We've known each other for a couple years, and his wife recently died as well. So why don't you go on ahead and make friends with little Uryu over there? And we already know that Ichigo was taking martial art classes at this point, and that I believe he stopped shortly after the death of his mother. So perhaps hanging out with Uryu, he starts hanging out with Uryu, and quickly learns of their shared heritage as Quincy's when he can sense his training. Like he goes to visit him, and maybe he can sense, even if only briefly, because at this point he's a lot younger. While his spiritual energy is pretty massive, it's not as large as it is when he's older, and there's not as much, his lack of control isn't as much of an issue when he's this young. So this ends up allowing him to better sense Uryu off in the distance, because like I said, he's more aware of his spiritual power now after that outburst he had when his mother died. Uh, so he decides to go out looking for Uryu and Soken. He finds them training, and Soken allowed this. He could obviously sense Ichigo coming in, and he allowed this because, let's say, Ishin made a mention that oh, his son was super active in martial arts, but he's dropped the activity ever since Masaki died. He's really trying to step up, but I think he's trying to grow up too fast taking care of his sisters. I know I'm busy, but he shouldn't have to worry about that as someone so young. And so, Soken lets him walk in on their training, and he explains things. He explains their heritage as Quincy's. He explains hollows and spirits, and even briefly mentions soul reapers. And while Ichigo wants to question, like, oh, why wasn't there a Soul Reaper there to, save my mother? Or why couldn't my mother use her powers? And Soken simply states that she was in an accident around the time that she met uh, Ichigo's father. And that when that happened, she ended up losing access to her abilities because she saved him from a very dangerous hollow. He ended up helping her get better physically, but she could never truly recover all of her powers, and what little powers she had must have left her when she saved Ichigo. And I don't know, maybe he doesn't exactly take this approach, but he does give him, he does explain things in a way that gets Ichigo to kind of calm down. He's more hot-headed than Uryu. For all we know, this could spark an even greater hatred against Shinigamis than what Uryu had in canon. But Ichigo is also a pretty rational kind of person, despite his hot-headedness, despite how brash he is. He can be very observant. He was obviously very intelligent. I think it was he did well in school, but he just was always getting into fights when he was younger, and then he got involved with Soul Reaper shenanigans. But yeah. So basically, Soken helps him through his issues, helps Uryu, and he decides he asks him if he wants to start training. And while Ichigo's kind of all for it, he wants to be able to be strong enough in case next time Yuzu and Karin are attacked. He also wants to talk to his father about it, which, Soken is okay with. He's not going to keep him from his father, so he's like, yeah, no, go ahead. Your father knows all about this stuff. If you want to ask him more, feel free to. That's your journey. Those are your questions to ask. So feel free. And that's what he ends up doing. He questions his dad, what he knew about his mom, what he knew about spirits. And Ishin, I'm kind of at a crossroads. He could even explain that he himself is a Soul Reaper, and that in that accident, in order to save Misaki, he gave up his powers, and that's why he wasn't able to help. Yeah, sure, let's go with that. I kind of want to make Ichigo more aware and OP in this scenario. So yeah, he learns about his own father's backstory, but he goes over it briefly. He states that he was a Shinigami captain. He was very powerful, but when he came to the Hollow, it was a very special case. It seemed like some sort of experiment that someone was doing. that he still doesn't know the complete nature of, but he does know that in the battle he was caught off guard by someone, the unknown assailant, which we end up finding out is Aizen, and he probably knows, but I don't think he wants to let little Ichigo in on that little nugget of information just yet. But he does tell him that he was injured during the battle. Misaki stepped in, saved him, and the hollow, the hollow Ryatsu that or is it Reishi that injected itself into her soul when it bit her, nearly caused her to die, and he gave up his powers and took on a physical body in order to help her recover and keep her safe. And he laments well, what a lot of good that did. And he tells Ichigo that if he wants to do this, he can. It's his choice. But he's young, and taking up these powers is going to be a very big responsibility. He's going to have to use them responsibly. He's going to have to keep everyone around him safe by not acting recklessly with them. He's going to have to know when and when not to exercise this power that he holds. A little bit of an Uncle Ben talk, but also a very more real talk. Because he's telling him that he's going to be getting involved with all of these forces that he doesn't truly understand. Soul Society, Quincy's and their history, and Hollows. It's a very messy, very long history that has spanned for thousands of years. If he gets involved in this world, he may never be able to get out of it. But Ichigo, fresh off of the loss of his mother and never wanting to experience that kind of loss again, whether it be his father, his new friend Uryu, his new grandfather figure and family in Soken, and his younger sisters, who so very much remind him of his mother. He never wants to lose them again. So he decides to go forward with training with Soken. And possibly later on, since Ichigo is going to be unraveling his powers, that seal is going to be wearing off a lot earlier. So there's potential for his father training him sometime down the line. So let's go on ahead and get into this earlier training. It's going to be a lot of him having to learn the basics. We can assume that perhaps Uryu already has knowledge on the basics of the difference between Reishi and Ryatsu, how to sense it, and Reiryoku, I believe that's what it's called. How to sense it, what kind of applications it can be used for outside of the signature Quincy abilities. So just enhancement of the body, which is something that isn't brought up a lot. Ichigo's almost always when he's fighting, he's in his Soul Reaper form. His soul is ejected from his body. But for Chad, Orihime, and Uryu, I don't think they ever have their souls ejected from their body when it comes to their training. I think they're always in their physical human bodies. And that's something Ichigo didn't really do when fighting, except for when he had his powers as a soul, as a Fullbringer. So yeah, he's actually going to be training his physical body to withstand his great spiritual power. He's gonna and which is really gonna help him out a lot. It's gonna help him get a better control of his power because he has to focus it through his body without harming himself. And he's gonna learn very quickly that his hybrid nature is gonna make things a little difficult for him. He subconsciously draws. We can say that as of now, perhaps the Zangetsus, Old Man Zangetsu, and White Zangetsu, are kind of aware of what's going on from Ichigo's inner world, especially now that he's more realizing his powers. But perhaps out of the two of them, depending on how you view and what your opinions and headcanons on these things are. But since he's specifically training his Quincy abilities, he's not gonna have to worry about accidentally drawing upon Hollow Reishi unless he gets into a life or death situation, or he just gets really pissed. Um, but yeah, so I don't think we'll have anything too much to worry about in regards to his hollow nature at first. So he's gonna learn things like how to form his Quincy bow, which he has a little bit more trouble with. Um, Soken at one point briefly goes over some more advanced abilities, especially since he believes that Ichigo might have a talent for Blood Vein that he may have inherited from his mother, which he ends up having. and he ends up educating them. He educates them about the two abilities beforehand. He doesn't get them too deeply into the ability, but then again, he did tell Uryu about the, what is it called, the Let stance, the glove that he wore that would sacrifice all of his Quincy powers. He did tell him about that at a very young age. So perhaps since there's a possibility for it, he informs the two of them about what ends up happening. About the what ends up happening about blood vein and blood artery, I think it's called, or blood artery, something along those lines. The offensive and defensive abilities of the Quincy, and he obviously teaches them the movement technique, which Ichigo gets down pretty well. He was a prodigy at Flash Step, could instinctively use Sonido in his hollow state, and learned how to use Bringer Light pretty effectively. Now, there's something I want to talk about. Um, what is it? I want to talk about the fact that Quincy powers and Fullbringer powers are very similar in nature. So Quincy powers, from what I understand, you draw in reishi from your surrounding environment. That could be from the spirit particles in the air, in the very environment, the ground around you, and depending if you're able to set it up, even from your own opponents. Um, let's see. And beyond that, sorry, I wanna make sure I have this right. So I'm searching up when Soken died. I don't want to accidentally, I don't want to accidentally get my timeline wrong. But let's see. Hold on. That's my cat messing with his bowl. Uh, you already ate. Sorry about that. Again, still new to all this stuff. But and when it comes, so I was explaining just now, Quincy powers you draw in from the environment, and when it comes to Fullbringer powers, you're able to draw it out from inanimate objects or things that hold great value and importance to yourself. That could be anything from, for Chad, people think it's his coin, but I'm pretty sure it's actually supposed to be his skin. Is that he takes great pride in his skin and his body. And that's why he has the clad type full ring. His full ring specifically forms directly over his body and enhances it. And like for Ginjo, it's from his cross, and he's able to make that sword similar to his Zanpakuto. And you've seen all the other examples. You have Jackie and her boots that's linked to her trauma. It's more so a bond and importance than it is anything else. Hmm. Sorry, I'm reading from the wiki. I don't think it was stated when he died. Just that it was when Uryu was younger. Let me see. I'm sorry for this. When did Soken Ishida die? Bleach. He was killed in battle. Okay, when? How many years before canon? Okay, I know Uryu was young. He looks pretty young. So, hmm. Like I said, this training begins shortly after the death of Masaki, which is 90. How many years? Let me see. 6 years prior. Yeah. Okay, so I was right. They were about 9 years old. So 6 years prior. to the start of canon when Rukia arrives. Okay. Hmm. I'll just have him die 3 years in. That should make sense. They're around 12ish. Okay. I don't know if it was if any other evidence was stated anywhere, but yeah, that's what I'm gonna go with. Um. So yeah, and like I was saying, you know, it's in regards to like how people's bonds with significant objects. I don't know if you know this. I'm pretty sure. I think it was sometime around the Grand Fisher attack, or when he left to Soul Society. I think it was when he left to Soul Society to save Rukia. Ishin gave Ichigo like this charm that was, I think it was supposed to be like some way of tracking him so that he could always keep an eye on him, and like it would notify him of his status and stuff. But I've seen some people like if they want to give him full bring early, they use that. But instead here, we're gonna go with Masaki's old Quincy cross, which if anyone wants to bring this up, like, oh, it probably wouldn't work due to Ichigo's Soul Reaper and Hollow Ryatsu. Like that might interfere with how he draws in power. He might end up pulling it from his own soul instead. So this is what I'm gonna say. Maybe Kisuke enhances it a little bit. Maybe he experiments with it so that it can better handle, his full power in case he ever brings it out. And this is how we're gonna get it. Him getting access to his full bring, which I'm gonna keep mainly the same. I don't really see any real thing to mess around with it. Some people might say it's, oh, he never had any experience with his time as a Shinigami, so it should be more Quincy based. I'm not saying it's not going to be more Quincy based. I'm going to evolve his full bring beyond what happened in canon. But for now, it's gonna be a little different. So one day while they're training, forming their Quincy bows, let's say uh, Uryu and Ichigo are having a little bit of a competition on how many of those arrows they can fire out. And Ichigo gets a little pumped up. They're having a spar maybe during their competition, and his reishi ends up changing from the white and blue, the typical white and blue, to a more white and red, briefly. And like maybe Uryu's attitude just gets him a little peeved, and it briefly shifts, and his arrows come out a little bit more powerful. And this kind of thing regularly keeps happening until one day he forms a bow that is black and blue instead. So similar to if you've played, I think it's Brave Souls, Bleach Brave Souls, where they have like all those art of like they come up with a lot of art for like a lot of cool forms that they end up creating, like a secondary release for a segunda etapa for like Grimjow and Nelio, and like a tercera, a third etapa for Ukiora, and like they have like this Quincy state for Ichigo, which looks a lot similar to like his outfit that he has when he's in Bankai after the Fullbring arc, where he has like the crisscross patterns all across his clothing. It looks a lot like that, but his left side is a little different, and like the bow that he forms, while sometimes it looks like a normal Quincy bow, he has like this thing wrapped around his arm, almost a little bit like Mugetsu, and it unfurls out into a cross shape that's similar to those cross shapes that he made when he started training his Fullbring. If you know what I'm talking about the first stage when he was only just using the badge, and he was creating those like disc things that he was throwing out of his badge, and like usually like they only had 3 or 4 prongs until it evolved into 8, and he could even release them from his sword when he was in the final state of his full bring. So it's gonna look a little bit like that, but black and blue instead of black and red like in the anime. Um, so like it's initially just a normal black and blue bow, but one day but as he's like training and trying to figure this out with Soken and Uryu, he pushes it to its limits, and it explodes out from the cross, like from the Quincy cross itself, it explodes out from 4 of the 5 points into that cross shape that I was talking about. Or you can have the 5 prong shape similar to the Quincy cross. Depends on how you want to go about it. Um, but it's not gonna change too much. That it's still gonna be a black cross outlined in blue, and it's gonna fire like significantly stronger black and blue arrows. And this is gonna be essentially his first stage of his full bring, and he's gonna learn that he's able to throw them out as well from just from his hand that he has his Quincy cross tied around. So he's going to be able to launch them as projectiles, which takes a little bit more reishi out of him, but you know, that's not going to be too much of a problem eventually. As we all know, he's a powerhouse when it comes to launching out those Getsugas and stuff. So he manages this. This is his first stage, and eventually he gains access to his second stage. Let's say a few months before the death of Soken. Um, he unleashes his power. Maybe, or you know what? Yeah, second stage, which is like when for in canon, it was like he had the clothes of a Soul Reaper. He had like the outfit, but it was all completely made out of reishi. And like you might say, oh, Zangetsu admitted that he made his clothes out of his reishi anyways, out of his Ryatsu. But here it's gonna have like a flame like design. Um, and maybe you can say that it's like more of a cross between, instead of just Soul Reaper power, instead of just the Soul Reaper clothes, it's a bit of a cross between traditional Quincy clothes and Soul Reaper. So like maybe he has the normal robes, but over it he has like that shoulder cape thing in black that's flowing over him, and he has like that's about it basically. He has that, and like maybe he has like a little cross design of like, I don't know, blue energy over his heart or whatever, depending on how you have those shoulder cape placed. And this is what he has access to, and in this he was able to create like a blade of reishi that kind of looked, when I think about it. Hold on, let me see what it looks like. Ichigo full bring stage 2. It kind of looked like Zangetsu. I can't get a good. It kind of looked like his true Shikai a little bit, not too much, but it's a longer blade. It's kind of a mix between a traditional katana and like the length of his Tensa Zangetsu, but more in the shape of the Kyber like cleaver blade that he has for his Shikai. Um, yeah, like let's say he learns how to form this blade of reishi, which isn't out of the question. Let's say he ends up figuring out this instead of using those rods that Uryu uses to make blades of reishi. That's my dog, by the way. Maybe he does that instead. Or you can even have him pull out that blade that Zangetsu used. Like this could be his starter blade that he pulls out, and like similar to how he would have his normal black and blue bow, and then he would have the cross-shaped black and blue bow. You can have him pull out that sword that old man Zangetsu had. If you don't know what I'm talking about, like when he confronts him in the most recent episode of Bleach that came out, he confronts Zangetsu and he's like, "Here, this is gonna be your true power," and he leaves that floating blue sword that has the shape crossed the sorry, the cross shaped guard. You'll know what I'm talking about. Look at the most recent episode of Bleach, and look at the talk between Ichigo and Zangetsu. And that's basically what he's gonna have. But like I said, black and blue. That's gonna be his color palette for now, at least. Um, and let's say after up until this point, a few months before the death of Soken, um, obviously having a training partner around has strengthened Uryu, and Ichigo is obviously a lot more powerful. Ichigo is much, much more powerful. Uh, and yes, so Ichigo is much more powerful. He's more realized of his abilities, and every now and again, Uryu and Ichigo, as some training, have gone out to slay hollows. And let's say ever since he's awakened this blade, he's been practicing kendo with his father. He was a master at zanjutsu, I believe that's what it's called, the Soul Reaper form of basic swordplay. It's zanjutsu, and it's like hakuda for their martial arts. So yeah, maybe he's been practicing that with his father as well, on the side outside of his Quincy training. Since he informed him, he is a Soul Reaper. So that's why I'm also explaining he still has those Soul Reaper-esque elements. He's aware of his status as a Soul Reaper, and Full Bring reflects what you view yourself as. You know, so that's why he still has Soul Reaper elements, but he's also aware of his Quincy heritage. So there's a lot more. It's a mesh between them. That's why he has that full blade, which is that it has like four. So handle, it's pronged out like this, and it also has it like that, and then the blade. So he has that kind of blade as like his super blade, where he's able to um, subconsciously he calls it, he well he's unleashing nameless Getsuga. If you don't know what I'm talking about, when he first used Getsuga Tencho, he didn't know what it was called, and he only learned it, I think, during his battle with Renji. I believe is when he learned the name of the technique, and knowing its name made it more powerful. So right now he's unleashing nameless Getsuga, and they're much much weaker. They're even weaker than the Getsuga he was launching out when he was in his final stage of full bring in canon. So very weak, and he has no experience with them. But he's getting better. He's practicing them, practicing Blood Vein. Uryu is becoming more tactical with his abilities. He's much more stronger. He's much stronger. Seeing Ichigo practice his abilities, firing off these big shots from his Quincy bow, he's trying to learn how to. He's been learning how to do the same. He's like been increasing his his pool of energy, how much he can put into what shot, into one shot, how many times he can pull off those big shots, you know, really exercising outside of it as well. Like he's been working with those, like I said, those reishi blades that Quincy's have, like the tubes that extend out kind of like a lightsaber. He's been practicing with those, one-handed, dual wielding. He's been getting a lot better in all of his abilities. Um, Yeah, like he's also been practicing Blood Vein on his own. He doesn't have the natural talent for it, but Ichigo has sort of been only focusing on Blood Vein because that's what he has this natural affinity for. Maybe Uryu is learning how to use Blood Artery as well to enhance his physical strength for attacks. Uh, but you know, they're still young. They don't have complete mastery over these abilities. They're just getting a handle on them. Sadly, they're not going to have much instruction from Soken for very long. Oh, and they in this timeline they both learned about the lead stilts, the glove that I was talking about. They both learned about it. Um, but eventually, sadly, Soken too dies when Mayuri keeps the Soul Reapers um, from rescuing Soken, so that he can dissect his body and learn about his abilities. And Uryu's hatred isn't going to be as powerful towards all Shinigami in general. He's going to care about Ichigo. It's not like he's going to suddenly hate Ichigo for being a Soul Reaper, and he's not going to have any kind of animosity towards Ishin. maybe he's like a bit awkward around him, but Ishin ends up talking to him and he explains, just like in the human world, in Soul Society, amongst the Soul Reapers, and with any group of people, there's always going to be bad apples. There's probably someone who high up who, out of some kind of petty revenge or unjustified hatred for the Quincy's, that's not exactly unjustified. The Quincy's kind of messed up with what they do to the natural balance, but yeah, just with how he feels in regards to them, um, you know, he he kind of just helps him get a better perspective on things. But he's still going to be a little sour, a little salty to any Soul Reapers he ends up having to meet going forward. But he's not going to have this unfettered hatred for them. Uh, and this only lights the fire under Ichigo even more. He wasn't strong enough or fast enough, and during their training, like now they're training a little bit alone. They're being supervised by Ryukin without any of them knowing. He's able to suppress his energy, and Ichigo is better at sensing, but he hasn't completely developed his sensory abilities just yet. Um, Ish and Ishin, whose powers have begun to return to him, not completely, because Ichigo isn't as powerful as he was, so it's not unraveling over the course of just a few months. But over the course of what's been 3 years now, the seal on his powers are practically gone, but not completely. So, because Ichigo still hasn't completely tapped into his hollow powers, but that's about to change. He's been tapping into them partially because, like I said, full bring is just naturally a form of hollow power in humans. Humans making use of what trace amounts of hollow power is within them. And high emotions with a main shonen protagonist who is aware and currently training to vent his frustrations. In the middle of training with Uryu, his full bring explodes. And let's say Kisuke was watching as well, because maybe he predicted not exactly what full bring is, because I don't think he ever really knew. I think he did eventually, but he doesn't know. This is his first time seeing it. And my cat just crapped in his litter box. It smells. But yeah, so maybe he's watching as well. Maybe he was the one um, who brought Ishin along to watch, since he can't zip around using his flash step just yet. And yeah, so they're all watching, and Ryukin steps in to pull Uryu aside as Ichigo's Ryatsu is coming out of control, and this white substance is forming around him, and everyone, like the adults watching, think he's gonna hollow fly. Uryu is completely and utterly terrified, and Ichigo is kind of freaking out, but also kind of letting it happen. He wants to like push against it, but instinctively, ooh, threw that in. Instinctively, he understands that this is some evolution of his power, so he lets it happen. And Kisuke steps in using his Zanpakuto um, instead of Ginjo. He steps in, tries to stop what's going on, aims his Zanpakuto to channel some kind of sealing Kido, but instead, in a similar manner to how Ichigo just instinctively pulled on nearly all of Rukia's spiritual power when he became a substitute Soul Reaper. Ichigo, in this very volatile state, instinctively draws in some of the power he was going to use for the Kido. He doesn't pull all of Kisuke's powers away, leaves him powerless, but he does draw on the power he was specifically channeling at that moment that was going to be used to the Kido, uses it to stabilize himself, since I believe it's what Soul Reaper power is the opposite of Hollow power. Or is it like, I don't remember. In the same way that Ishin's Soul Reaper powers was able to quell the Hollow within Masaki, um, the Shinigami power in Kisuke that is being assimilated to awaken Ichigo's own Soul Reaper power, which is of course melded with his Hollow power. It helps stabilize it, and his full bring fully forms, and he has the complete full the complete full ring, and instead of the his sheath having, or instead of his the hilt of the sword being his Soul Reaper badge, it's his Quincy cross. And maybe you can say instead of that one-sided blade, it's a dual-sided blade. I actually saw a while ago a Quincy full ring Ichigo, and he had like this cool blade that was similar to the one I was talking about earlier. It has like the 5-star cross, the Quincy cross as the hilt, or not hilt, the cross guard, basically. And it looked super cool. I don't know if someone, I'll probably end up finding it. I think I have it saved somewhere. I'll pull it up and maybe I'll put it as like the thumbnail. I'll like splice all the images I was talking about of like Quincy Ichigo and all that stuff. But yeah, he has a blade that's more similar to the Quincy blade that Zangetsu was holding. Old Man Zangetsu Quincy blade. I really hope it doesn't show me the. Okay, yeah. Oh, I was wrong about the blade he was holding when he gave Ichigo his true power. It's just a normal sword. Well, whatever. His sword that he has, that he pulls out now, is gonna have 4 prongs in the shape of a sword. I mean, in the shape of the Quincy cross, with the 5th prong pointing upwards being the blade. And that's gonna be what his blade looks like for now. Yeah, that's gonna be what it looks like for now. It still has the bandage wrapping on it. Hmm, maybe not. Maybe instead it's similar to his Fullbring Shikai. Has like some black wrappings and a chain at the end of it. So it's gonna be more similar to his false Bonkai. But yeah, either way, complete clad Fullbring now that he has access to, and he eventually passes out. He's much younger. He's about 12 years old, maybe 12 and a half, depends on whatever. But and going forward, he's going to be training much more actively with Uryu. He has the power. He always kind of had that edge of power ever since he unlocked his full ring, but now it's much more vast. He's probably at a similar level, just in terms of like raw spiritual power and presence, as he was when he first became a substitute Soul Reaper. But he has more skills. He's more skilled in combat, has a wider variety of abilities, and over the course of the next 3 years, Ishin finally completely unlocks his like the seal on his powers is completely undone now that Ichigo has some level of access to his hollow powers in the form of his final Fullbring. Maybe Ichigo kind of advances his Fullbring a little bit. He gets better control over it, so he's not constantly leaking his spiritual energy out. But similar to how it was in canon, this leaking out of his spiritual energy causes an evolution of the spiritual energy of the people around him, specifically his friends, which are still going to be the same. Chad, Tatsuki, and Orihime, specifically, those three. I'm bringing in Tatsuki into this. I always thought it was a shame that she didn't get any kind of powers. I thought that would have been cool. And I saw a fanfiction that made a really cool kind of power based around like her martial arts, so that's what I'm gonna give to her. I'm gonna give her that kind of full bring, but that's gonna be for later. Um, right now, Ichigo has become much, much more powerful. He has another 3 years to completely master this stage of his full bring, and I have a bit of an idea on what to do for a storyline predating canon. Let's say takes place over the course of the year before canon starts. So it's gonna start a year before canon. Um, they're all around 14 years old. All the main characters are around 14 years old. Uh, And yeah, kind of want to end the video here, but I kind of want to keep going. Briefly cover this first arc. Okay, screw it. Um, Aizen has been watching this entire time. He's been keeping tabs on the situation, and he has learned of this evolution of Ichigo's abilities. And let's say Ichigo's spike in his powers has drawn in more powerful hollows, so they're regularly fighting against them, and eventually, you know, Orihime gets caught up in the stuff with her brother a year earlier. Chad gets involved with the parakeet a year earlier, and let's say Tatsuki is the one. Let's say Tatsuki ends up developing her. She gets into a situation. Um, she's been seeing Ichigo running around fighting these monsters alongside that Uryu guy. Um, she's very suspicious of her friend, what he's been doing, what he's been getting involved with, and she ends up visiting his house one day. Because like I said, they're childhood friends, and let's say here, since Ichigo has been privately keeping up with his martial arts with his father and practicing Hakura, the Shinigami martial arts. Let's say she catches him training one day, and for all time's sake, he decides to bring her into the fold. They train personally at his house, but they keep it to strictly human level sparring only. But she can tell he's holding back, and let's say she pressures him about it, and especially after the events with Orihime and Chad, he brought them into the fold instead of having Rukia, or I guess in this case it would probably be Kisuke and Ishin. But instead of having them wipe their memories, he decides to bring them into the fold, inform them about the fact that he can see spirits, because he was always kind of open about that fact. It was apparently some kind of open rumor, open secret that he could see spirits in Karakura Town, and only his friends really took him seriously, especially when you know shit started to hit the fan. But yeah, he brought those two in into the fold, told them about it, and just wants them safe. And without anyone knowing, their powers have begun to develop a lot earlier. And Tatsuki ends up confronting him about it. She gets brought into the fold, and now her own powers are starting to develop. And this comes all to a head when Aizen, being his meddling self, decided to look into any other cases of people with like humans with spiritual potential outside of being a Quincy, developing powers in relation to hollows. And his investigating, he decided to look into another human who was connected to Soul Reapers, Ginjo. I think it's Ginjo Kujo. He looks into what happened to him, and he learns about this group of execution that he has. And in monitoring them, he learns about their abilities. Maybe he doesn't learn about them completely in depth, but he learns their surface level. He knows Tsukishima is definitely a crafty one, someone to watch out for with potentially game-changing powers. And we can say that Aizen, being his usual self, manipulates events to get execution into Karakura Town and to try to recruit Ichigo and this cousin of his into their fold, because all they know is that they're spiritually powerful humans. Ginjo might be aware of what Quincy's are, but he doesn't really mind having him around. He'd be a pretty valuable asset against Soul Society, and he thinks that he'd be able to exploit any possible grudge and bad blood between Quincy's and Shinigami to really bring them into the fold. And maybe as they're explaining them, making their pitch, they maybe they learn about the possibility of Ichigo's friends developing powers. Specifically, the three that I've already mentioned: Chad, Orihime, and Tatsuki. And maybe Tsukishima ends up targeting them. And he does this whole thing, inserting himself into their lives. And but thankfully, Ichigo and Uryu are safe, and all these execution members, they're a lot weaker. All right, this is like 2.5 to possibly 3 years before they came into the the main story. They're not as powerful, and especially since they haven't stolen Ichigo's powers. Ichigo, on the other hand, is much more powerful, much more experienced, and much more protective of all of his friends. He's not going to let anything happen, and the second he figures out what Tsukishima did to everyone he loves outside of Uryu, and outside of Ishin, Uruhara, and Ryukin, who have been keeping an eye on the situation and have kind of wanted to let Ichigo and Uryu handle this. Of course, they're willing to step in, and when Tsukishima ends up messing with Yuzu and Karin's memories, Ishin very much wants to step in and just Getsuga tension the hell out of him with Engetsu. But he holds himself back, um, and Ichigo ends up absolutely rocking their shit. He beats all of them. Uryu and Ichigo beat all of them. And he ends up calling more upon his hollow powers. And let's say at one point Ginjo revealed that he was a substitute Soul Reaper, and as he's busy humiliating him. Let's say Ichigo, or it could have been Kyusuke as well, took his badge. I kind of want, because I want to use that for later. But while this is happening, Ichigo ends up evolving his Fullbring unexpectedly. He ends up forming a half mask. If you've seen plenty of fan art, you could search up Fullbring Ichigo with mask. I've seen one where he has like a half mask over the bottom of his face. He forms that, which calls upon his instinctive hollow powers more. And let's say only one of his eyes forms like the black sclera, however the hell you pronounce that. The white of his eye goes black, and his iris turns yellow. He gets that hollow eye in like one of his eyes, and he forms a secondary blade that basically looks exactly like the Fullbring blade that he had in canon for his final Fullbring. Has the white bandages, is shaped similarly to that blade that he has in his false Fullbring false Fullbring Shikai. That really weird looking one that I also kind of like the design of. I think that's what it looked like. Just search up his final Fullbring. He has that blade as well as his as well as more Quincy styled blade. And let's say over the course of these past 2 years actually, like I said, this is all taking place. Let's say now we're into like 10 months before canon. Let's say all of this like meeting Ginjo, getting used to the Fullbringers, training with them, training with execution, and Tsukishima eventually inserting himself into everyone's lives and fucking with everyone, and then pissing Ichigo off. This all takes place over the course of 2 months. They're much more cautious. They're a lot more cautious than they were in canon, because in canon he was a war criminal, but he was also completely, or not a war criminal, a war hero and a very powerful Shinigami, but he was also this, in their eyes, this clueless person who was now completely powerless and didn't know the potential power that he had. Here, he's almost completely realized that power and his own Quincy heritage, and has been training under a Shinigami captain in swordplay, martial arts, and all that kind of stuff. And what the hell, let's just say he's learned some Kido. He's not the best at it, but his control is ridiculously better than it was in canon, and he's able to pull off like any spell that he wants. Maybe he's been training with Urahara too. No, I'm gonna save that for later. But yeah, Ichigo stomps, unlocks a second blade and a half mask. Some of his hollow abilities shine through. Maybe he instinctively shoots out a ball to like keep anyone from interfering. Maybe like that one kid with the knuckle dusters that Tsukishima was taking care of. Um, since he's a lot younger, he's much more brash. He tries jumping in out of nowhere, and Ichigo just sends him away with what he thinks, like what he tries to instinctively just swat him away from afar, Like maybe he just tries to create a shockwave and he ends up just firing out a bala, those little things that Yami was shooting out at Kisuke in their battle. Um, yeah, he fires that out and he's like, "Ooh, I'll use that later." Uh, and oh, he's learned about Bringer Light. Let's say he kind of knew how to do it, but over the course of training with the full bringers, he's learned how to fully bring out his Bringer Light. And I can't believe I didn't mention this. Um, Chad, Orihime, and Tatsuki have developed the first stage of their full bring and are on the verge of their second. So, well, Orihime didn't really have stages. She just learned how to properly use her powers more and learned how to believe in them, because that's literally what her powers are kind of more. There's more centered around belief. Like her ability to reject is more based around her emotions. So, she can pull out the barrier, the shield. She can pull out the healing, and she has a little bit more confidence in attacking. Um, Chad has that first arm that he brought out, the first right arm. Um, he hasn't developed it towards the shield just yet, but maybe he was close. Um, and Tatsuki. Ooh, Tatsuki. Um, in order to kind of help out his friend, let's say Ichigo, when he brought them into the fold, he wanted to help keep them safe. So with Uryu, or I'm sorry, with Orihime, he just made a promise to protect her. With Chad, he brought him in and just told him to, when it came to, facing against Hollows, to just run away. Because he kind of had already seen when it came to dealing with the parakeet and that whole situation. And when it came to the console, we can just say that Ishin did it. Um, what was I gonna say? That he just told him to basically, when it came to fighting fights for him, to step out of fights against Hollows, to let Ichigo handle those fights, and Ichigo would let Chad handle fights against regular people, like everyday problems. He would be there by his side throughout school when things got tough, dealing with social situations, and just as the silent but friendly giant friend that he is, and perhaps even looking after his sisters. He's much more protective of his sisters than ever before, at least at this point in canon. So maybe he just asks him to help watch over his sisters when he's out slaying hollows and training. And when it comes to Tatsuki, he kind of asks her to make a similar promise, but mm, let's say since he's learning Hakuda, Yoruichi took an interest and just asked Kisuke to make some training gear that she could use to train at higher levels. Not at the levels Ichigo is able to train in Hakuda, but she's at least able to keep up when he's not using full bring. His like the second clad full bring the second stage full bring that he had when she was brought into the fold. Um, and like maybe he was given like a special set similar to those weapons, those gauntlets and those weapons that Yoruichi had in the fight against Aizen. Similar to that, but like it's a pair of gloves and like greaves that she has, and whenever she gets when she unlocks her full bring, they basically cast her on fire. She basically has fire fists and fire kicks. Um, if you're into Bleach fan fiction, you probably know where I got the inspiration for that from, and you probably know what I'm gonna be doing with the story later. Not too much, but you'll know a little bit. But yeah. So Tatsuki can shoot and kick fireballs now. She's so much more dangerous than normal. Um, but yeah, sadly Tsukushima messed with all of them, and but they're much more powerful, and they're gonna be much more powerful by the time canon rolls around. But yeah. Hmm. Ichigo stomps execution, like I was trying to say earlier. Completely stomps them. Stomps Ginjo, who doesn't get to take his full bring because his sensory abilities are better. Now that he has more access to his hollow powers, maybe his Pisquisa, the sensory abilities of the Arankar and stuff, kicks in, and his sensory abilities have received a proper buff. He was never good at. He was never that good at his controlling his spiritual energy, and while he's much better, sensing things was always a little bit of a problem for him, but now that problem has been completely eliminated. Um, Execution is taken care of, let's say, by Kisuke. Um, he seals away Ginjo and Tsukishima, and being the chaotic gambler scientist that he is. I mean, he let Mayuri out. He let Mayuri out and let him act as his assistant. So uh, let's say he ends up taking in some of the members of Execution. I don't know. Um, that rich kid seemed like, you know, maybe he helps just set him up in the city so that he can keep an eye on him. He starts his own little tech company. I'm pretty sure he came from like a company that he ended up being like a family, a wealthy family that owned some kind of tech company, and then he got kicked out or something. So let's say he gives him the funds to, I don't know, advertise his little shop on the internet. Handle his social media and stuff. He keeps Riruka around. Riruka, pink haired girl, keeps her around. Mainly to use her dollhouse as like as a training simulator for the more weaker students that he's going to be having soon. You know who I'm talking about, those three. Um, and same thing for that blonde kid, the blonde rich kid. And he's gonna have those three, those two, and the clock guy, that old man with the really weird powers. He's gonna have those three around. He brings them into them, and he basically tells them, oh, you're completely lucky that Ichigo didn't just decide to completely erase you from existence, and you're doubly lucky that I find you interesting enough to keep Ishin from messing you up. He wouldn't kill, he wouldn't kill you, but he would make your life a living hell. Not that I'm gonna be any different. We all know how Kisuke is. He's gonna make life a living hell for these guys now that he has them as guests. And I don't know. Let's say Jackie kind of goes her own way. Um, she decides to travel. Maybe she had a conversation with Chad or Ichigo. She got some talk no jutsu type stuff, some shonen main character talks that got her to realize that the way she viewed her powers was a little off. She should have more pride in them, despite the trauma that they're connected to. Move forward the way Ichigo did, the way all these main characters have done. Um, and yeah, so this all wraps up. Tsukishima and Ginjo are have been sealed away by some Kido. Um, Ichigo and Uryu are more powerful than ever. Our three human buddies are going to be much more relevant by the time canon rolls around. Uh, they're going to be trained by Urahara, who makes himself known properly. He's been around Ichigo and Uryu before, but he's going to make himself much more prevalent in their training for these final 10 months before Rukia shows up. And yeah, damn, that took me a while, an hour. Yeah, we should have covered everything up until the start of canon. And there are two characters who have not mentioned too much outside of the fact that they're basically plot devices. Yuzu and Karn. But I think I want to save that for the next video. Before I do leave though, Aizen. He was watching, he set this all up. And he decides for his first testing of Ichigo when Rukia comes about, he's gonna have to shake things up a little. Maybe it's time he sets up a reuniter between Frankenstein and the monster he's created. Maybe it's time to test out setting up an Arankar from a more lower level hollow. Maybe it's time Ichigo meets with Grand Fisher again. So, yeah. Fishbone D is still going to be there. That first hollow who attacked but he's going to be accompanied by his Rancor boss. But yeah, I think that's where I'm going to end it. Ichigo now has access to a much more evolved and fully realized full brain. Didn't say this was his limit though. Uryu is much more powerful, much more skilled, has access to abilities like blood vein and blood artery, although they're not completely mastered, but he can at least employ them in battle. Ichigo is aware of all of his heritage. He's learned some Kido spells that I might have him use in the future. Um, he's a practitioner of Zanjutsu and Hakuda, uh, and can use his full brain powers in conjunction with his Quincy powers, bringing a balance to his, albeit somewhat limited, Quincy powers and his especially limited Shinigami and Hollow powers. It's going to make things a lot more easier when the time comes to fully realize his abilities. And his three besties in Chad, Orihime, and Tatsuki are going to be training with the visor, with not the visors. What the hell am I talking about? With the Fullbringers and Kisuke, which Uryu and Ichigo are also going to be joining, but at a much higher intensity. They're going to be developing their powers over these next 10 months, and they are going to be very, very powerful and not at all shafted when the time comes. So, yeah, I think that's what I'm going to end it here for now. I really like this. I might just make part 2 immediately. We'll see. But yeah, that should be all for part 1. Thank you all for being here, for all watching me for this first video and listening to me ramble. And like, comment, subscribe if you feel like it. Share me your thoughts. Criticism is more than welcome, but if you're gonna be a dick, just don't even bother. You can either dislike and leave a hateful comment, or you can just not bother, just close the video. Completely up to you though. And I will see all of you in a bit. We'll see. Bye bye.